Hi everyone. Thanks for being here to this Angular session at this Java conference. That's weird. Before we start, I just wanted to thank those people who liked the all Angular sessions during Devoxx. So thanks for everyone. That means a lot for us and for me especially. So during this session, we will talk about state management in your UI, in your Angular UI, in app UI, using Angular and RxJS. Who knows about RxJS? Rx Java? Everyone? No. Okay, so yeah, Reactive Extensions for JavaScript. So my name is Wassim Chegham. I'm a developer advocate engineer for Sphere in Paris. So I work mostly with front-end technologies. Not much Java or Kotlin, unfortunately. I'm also a GDE for the Angular team, so if you have any issue with Angular, come talk to me after the talk or tweet at me at Manikiniko on Twitter. So before we talk about Angular, let's just see how AngularJS worked with state management. Anyone knows AngularJS, like the older version of Angular? Everyone? Yeah, okay. So in AngularJS, we had this MVVM model, which is like the view get updates every time that the model changes, with this thing called data binding. So the data binding implementation in AngularJS was made thanks to this digest loop. So that was some magic inside the AngularJS framework that tried to update like both ways your data on your on the view. So with this comes some sort of issues, because your AngularJS application was some sort of graph, like a bidirectional graph, because every time a component gets updates, and because you have two-way binding, some other properties inside another component get updated, and all Angular, like the core, had to check again many times the whole application instead so it can like update all of you, right? So with this comes some like performance issues. Who had Angular performance issues with AngularJS applications? Like everyone, all of us, we had this sort of performance problems. So that was mainly because of this implementation of this digest loop, right? We had also some complexity because we had to like deal with every component, make sure that we use some immutability implementation and come up with weird solution to that, plus all the side effects for this. So, and the most really complicated thing is this black magic happening inside the framework, and you don't have access to it. So if you want to know more about the dirty check-in and how AngularJS made possible this two-way binding, a friend of mine called Tero has written a deep dive article about this. So please give it a shot. So now about Angular. So the good news is in Angular, the new version of AngularJS, it's not you don't have to use MVVM. If you want to use MVC, it's up to you. If you want to use model view intent, you decide. But the inner framework, the Angular itself, is written using this thing called FRP, reactive functional programming, or function reactive programming. So because Angular, the core of Angular, is reactive, yeah. Who knows FRP, functional reactive programming? Okay, so Wikipedia can give you the answer, but what we really care about in this definition is how to program an asynchronous data flow using functional programming and model this complexity through time. So in other words, this resembles to streams. So we all know about streams, and I like to see streams like this, like stream of cat. I can watch this the whole day. No, we don't have time. So in other words, a stream is basically a sequence of ongoing asynchronous events, and which is like more importantly ordered in time. So a little quick animation. We have this is like time, the blue line. We can get events. So here you are in your app, your UI app. You can like click on buttons, on keyboards, wherever. So all these things like trigger events. So you can get all those events. Even like when you make an XHR request to the server, that's also an event. Errors are also events, and then you can like end the stream. So this is basically a stream. So how do we work with streams? So that's thanks to RxJS, Reactive Extensions for JavaScript. So RxJS is basically one implementation for this in the JavaScript world. We have many others. Please click on the link to like to know more about the implementation, because it's getting into the JavaScript standard. I mean, like talking about observables, not RxJS. So quickly, observables are, I like to define them like they are like promises, like features for Java developers. So we call them promises on the JavaScript side. But they are not promises, they are just like them. But for sure they are asynchronous. And observables, they are also like arrays, but like meaning that we can iterate over them, but they are not arrays. So with observables, we can create stream, combine it, transform it, subscribe to it, or we can call it react to changes also. So we have methods, like many methods that we can use in order to perform some sort of computation over on these values. For instance, map, reduce, filter, zip, and like there are tons of methods, functions. So here we have a like a JavaScript sample code with a simple like function that does some reactive stuff using 3 operators. So we create a stream using the range operator from 0 to 10, and then we transform those values and then get the result in the subscribe. So by the way, this is before RxJS 5.5, so the newest version, like 5.5 and plus, we will use this sort of API, which is called the latable operators. So just import the operator you want and then combine them using the pipe operator. So it's like a compose function in math. So yeah, this is funny because you can even put it in the tweets and it fits well. So how does Angular use observables? Because this is like an Angular talk. So again, the good news, like when you write your Angular app, by default, it's a reactive app. Everything is Angular is reactive. Like if you use HTTP, if you use forms, the router, or even like some sort of core APIs, everything is like streams. Everything is reactive. For instance, here I have a sample code for like a model-driven form. I'm not going to explain all this like on the HTML part. But basically, you can create a form using this this new API in Angular 2. And then you can use this MDF property, which is your form, called the value changes property, which is a stream, actually. And then, since you have like a stream, you can pipe it and compose it and like work with your controls inside your form the way you want. Even like more advanced sample, here we can subscribe, sorry, to the ng-submit stream. And before we can like transform, transform some controls. For instance, here I'm getting the email input form, and then I'm using the flat map operator to send the request to the server, for instance, to validate the email or some sort of like things like that. Again, with HTTP, I mean, we all use HTTP in all of our Angular apps. The HTTP API is by default streamable. It returns an observable. So here we call the get method. We can even give it a type. Here I'm using TypeScript, by the way. So I have static types. And the get method returns an observable. So I can, for instance, use this kind of stuff. I can here create, this is another example. So I can create a stream using the interval observable creator. And then every time, like every 1 second, for instance, hit the server with the flat map operator, get some sort of data, and then randomize some facts, for instance, here. So this is the kind of code you write when you're like reactive in your app. So yeah, feel free to move to this kind of approach. It's a different way of thinking, I know, but it like makes the code more readable. And also, since the introduction of this pipe operator, it also makes your bundle size lighter, because the compiler, the Angular compiler, Angular like bundler that bundles your JavaScript file, will only use the operator you are using, like include it into bundle, instead of including the whole RxJS library. So just one last thing. You can also, like, if you're an Angular developer, you've also like created components, compose components, and then make a parent component that talk to a child component, for instance. What I mean by that is, here you have a parent component that has a child component, and this child component triggers some sort of event. So you can like define a function that reacts to the onChild event, for instance. And inside the child event, the child component, this is how you construct this event, using the event emitter with a type, for instance, string here, and then just make some silly code here that triggers an event foo. Triggers an event output event with a value foo every time it creates, like, gets a new instance. All right, so that's how Angular loves observables. So thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, just use my Twitter handle or just catch me outside. Thank you.